All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, come on, guys, wake up. Good morning.
Good morning.
Much better. Welcome to our new home. We are super excited to be here. Thank you for coming. It's lovely to see new faces, new home, new faces. We are super happy to be here. And as always, before we start our lecture, we will do our initial prayer by our friend Katarina, and she will also do our reading.
Good morning, everyone. A little message from Joanna de Angelis in the book Happy Life. Be a real friend. Know how to conduct yourself with discretion and nobility with those who choose your friendship. Discretion is a rare treasure in earthly friendships. It is normally replaced by insensitivity and unseriousness. Everyone likes noble and discreet company, which inspires confidence and leads to tranquility. Listen, see, follow the conversations with nobility, and be faithful to the confidence deposited in you. Let's close our eyes now. Take a deep inhale. Let's try to calm our physical bodies. Let's connect with the spiritual team that is here today. Everything physically is a little shift due to the move. Our minds are still adjusting to this new place. But one certainty is that they found this place for us. And they have been treating this place even before we get here, throughout the move, throughout the changes, throughout the chaos. Now it's physically in a much better shape, and our minds will adjust to it. Let's connect with the spiritual team that is here, open ETSS today with joy, with a lot of positive and loving energy for our new home. We're all thankful for being here together, and our energy today, whatever we are irradiating today, it's the first start to the energy that is going to form, to shape the vibration of our new home. So let's keep our minds elevated to Jesus. Let's support Tiago with the first speech here today. And let's keep this harmony and love and build together our new home. Thank you, and so be it.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good.
Was it easy to come here?
Yes. It's far.
It's far. It was easier for me, so I'm happy. Okay. For some people, I know that it's easier. For some, not so easy. But you know what? I think that everybody's going to enjoy. I am already enjoying very much being here. That is a very good energy, as we say. A very good atmosphere. Actually feels like a full house, and I am sure that is even fuller in the spiritual side. Today's lecture has a lot to do with the life in the spiritual world. So then we can imagine that not only we are here in the material world, participating in this lecture and listening and learning and enjoying, celebrating, but at the same time, imagine how much more is happening right now in the spiritual world. One of the first things that I noticed when I came here, I looked around and there were a few different rooms. And I was looking at those rooms and I was wondering, what is happening here, right? What is going to happen in the next weeks, in the next months? And then we looked there and somebody said, oh, maybe that room is for the kids. Yeah. At the same time, I looked and I said, maybe also on Tuesdays, there is the mediumship group that may happen there. Yeah. And then on Wednesdays, there is studies happening. So imagine what is happening right now. Simple. We cannot see what is happening in that street here, Bayview, but so much is happening there. We're not seeing, but life is happening. But imagine then, if we transcend in the spiritual world, So much is happening here. Maybe there are kids learning there. Maybe there are studies happening there. Maybe there are spirits receiving enlightenment, hope, consolation, treatment right there, right here where we are. And surely we are all being well accompanied. We are being well treated by the spirituality, by the spirits that also came here with us, curious, to work, to protect us, to help us to take advantage of lessons, and to celebrate as well. The name of the lecture today, and like always, it is a challenge for me because I go there and I look at the title and then I say, okay, that is a challenge. I need to learn something about it. And I feel there is two titles. The first one is Chico Xavier and André Luiz. This one, for those who are not yet familiar with Spiritism, those are two very important names for Spiritism and two important people that we learn a lot from them. And also, the second part is called Blessing of Mediumship. And the relationship between those two spirits, Chico Xavier and André Luiz, is through this that we call mediumship. So let's try, first of all, to understand what it is. And for those who are already familiar to Spiritism, it is a refresher. For those who are new, we're going to learn a little bit about some of the premises, the foundations, the basis of Spiritism. And it is very important because those are not only the foundations of Spiritism, but a foundation of our own spiritual evolution. So hopefully we can live today reminding ourselves of our nature as spirits, where we came from, the relationship that never ends between those two different dimensions of existence, and how we can continue living our lives, not only thinking about this existence today, but living our lives as spirits, incessantly growing and evolving in our lives. All right. So in Spiritism, there is a very important assumption or a very important premise. We are spirits. Therefore, there are spirits, and each one of us is one of them. We come originally from the spiritual world. And right now, what is happening with us? We are what we call incarnated. Our spirits arrive on this earth through a rebirth. We grow together with our bodies and we evolve together in this life, probably putting in practice like a school where we learn many things from the spiritual world, but we need to find a field where we can apply those teachings, those lessons. And what lessons are that, Chad? Good question. Those lessons are about how to live as spirits, even in this life, putting perspective what we live here today, give the importance that is due to the life in the material world, but at the same time, never forgetting that our nature, our essential nature is spiritual. And what we do here, we are going to carry the consequences of our actions, our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships is going to continue with us throughout different existence, different incarnations, until the end of times, as we say. We, as spirits, don't cease to exist. The life of the body is temporary, but the life of the spirit is permanent. We are now in the material world, incarnated. But as we said before, we are constantly surrounded by the spiritual world. Let's think of different dimensions of the same life. Imagine that there is so much that we cannot see, so much that we cannot hear, so many sounds that even some other animals can hear and we cannot. There are so many spectrums of light that we cannot perceive, but from animals to other creatures and machines today help us to understand that is way more than our senses can perceive. Just from that, we understand that there is much more than we can grasp. The spiritual world is part of that, for now, invisible, intangible dimension for most of us, but not for all. If we are spirits, if we came from the spiritual world, probably we have some sort of connection that never ended with that essential, original, primordial world. I was trying to find some sort of analogy. Every analogy that we make is usually poor about that relationship between that spiritual world and the material world. But the only thing that I can think of is back in the 80s, I needed to move from one state to another. Back then, even telephone was something that was like expensive. It was not very easy for people to communicate. We would wait specific times when it was okay for us to talk to people like in another state, let alone imagine another country. And probably some of you who are here, before the internet time, probably you know that. So imagine that I leave my hometown and I need to go somewhere else. And for many of us back then, some of those changes were permanent. We would not be able to go back. And the only way to communicate from time to time, it would be either through some letters or through some phone calls that would not happen very often. So there would need to be the right conditions for this to happen. The right time. Usually, even in depending the country, we will need to coordinate, time zones and be able to be there, because telephone was not something that we'll carry around. So the person at home needed to be there, many times in the kitchen or somewhere, and then the other person will call. And that confluence of factors would then allow that communication between me in a completely different state to my family that was somewhere else. It is a very poor analogy, but it is an analogy that somehow makes sense if we think that for us to be able to communicate in many different ways, we need to have the right conditions for that. Therefore, let's think that the communication between the spiritual world and the material world happen. And it happens, in fact, more often than we can imagine. The difference is many of us don't pay attention. Many of us don't perceive that in a more tangible way. Many of us don't realize that influence, but that influence is constant. So let's think about what is really then for Spiritism, what we call mediumship, and who are those then who are the mediums. Let's say that the mediumship is the ability of the spirits from one of those dimensions to communicate with the spirits of another. Put very plain and simply, that's what it is. Mediumship is that communication between the two dimensions of existence, the spiritual world and the material world. And how is this done? This is done through some of us who we are going to call mediums. And then you're going to ask me, if we are spirits, can't we all communicate? In essence, the answer is yes, because we are spirits and we hold that ability to continue connected with the spiritual world. all of us not only can, but all of us are constantly connected. Allan Kardec, in the Medium's book, this one here, would say that every individual who senses the influence of spirits in any degree can be called mediums. Didn't we ever have thoughts that we don't know where came from? Didn't we ever have feelings that we were taken by with no apparent reason? How many of us, in times of struggle or difficulty, or in times when decisions needed to be made, were taken by some inspiration or some intuition that we didn't know where it came from? We had no idea how this came to us, but somehow those ideas, those thoughts, they were providential. The words were providential, or some sort of alert, or some sort of awareness that we had of situations that we didn't understand. This may be very well a consequence of our ability to continue being influenced by the spiritual world. Not only we are surrounded by spirits, but we have spirits. Just like we have parents, teachers, mentors in many different areas in our lives, we also have spiritual mentors, spiritual guides, spiritual teachers that help us in many different areas of our lives. I am absolutely sure that everybody that comes to talk here in the Spirit Center, we don't do this alone. A lot of what we share here with you, probably in a normal circumstance, reading a book, I will not take so many of those ideas. But somehow reading, reflecting, studying. Sometimes I start a couple of days ago and then I go to bed, and then when I wake up, part of my lecture is completely changed. I go back there and suddenly there is something else that I need to write. Some people are laughing there because you understand, whoever gave a lecture here knows that sometimes we take a few days and let's say that our ideas start percolating and maturing, but maybe, who knows, maybe then the spiritual world came to our aid and said, not that good, right, Thiago? You gotta make it better a little bit. And they help us and they influence and they inspire us, because this is very important. What we are doing here is very important. We need to be very careful, very cautious, very responsible. In Spiritism, we say we need to have our good morals. We need to understand the good from bad, understand how to share that information, because many of us will take that to heart and understand and follow and pay attention. Many of us are very interested in trying to make sense of certain things that we go through in our lives. So, mediums are all of us in a general sense. But there are some individuals that for one reason or another, and this probably is going to be a theme for another lecture on the specifics, why certain people do see, do hear, do perceive differently, do have more awareness of the spiritual world, even of spirits. They can hear them. They can see the spirits. They can see what is happening in the other side, in the other dimension of life. They are able to see what is happening with those also who departed from this life and now continue living. Some of those individuals that from now on we are going to call mediums. Not all of us who have the ability to communicate, but from now on, let's call mediums those who have that more ostensive, tangible ability to perceive and to communicate with the spiritual world. And there are reasons for that. Allan Kardec would say this ability or this faculty is inherent to humankind. Let's think that because we are still evolving, maybe one day all of us will have that ability much more ostensive. And that communication and that interaction with the spiritual world, that it's going to be like communion. Today, not yet, but we are all working towards having a much better relationship with the spiritual world. So then we can be better helped, we can be better influenced, we can better sift through those influences and understand what are the influences that are more or less positive for all of us. Allan Kardec will continue in the Medium's book saying there are few individuals who possess that ability that is very well characterized. What do you mean by that? It means that some specifically will perceive through hearing, some will perceive through sight, some will receive ideas and communications and be able to transmit those ideas. Some will enter in a state similar to sleepwalking and will be able to have the perceptions come back to consciousness and be able to talk to us. How many stories that many of us heard before of near-death experiences? And many individuals have those states where maybe clinically they had passed, but because of advancements in medical science, they are brought back to existence, and they say something was happening the other side. I was not totally asleep. I was not completely unconscious. So there are many examples. Spiritism has done, and it still does, a lot of work studying, researching, publishing, and showing that that relationship exists because the spiritual world exists and it's there influencing us. And the other important thing about mediumship for us, mediumship is not exclusive to spiritism. The connection with the spiritual world exists since the world is the world and since humans exist. Let's think about if we look at the scriptures, if we look at the Bible, how did Moses receive the 10 Commandments? When he goes and talks to a fire bush and then comes back with rules and regulations and laws, many people would say that, Moses was the first person that was using a tablet using the cloud. So technology is already there. But actually, through mediumship, he was communicating with the spiritual world, receiving instructions how to better help the people, the enslaved people that came out of Egypt. Because he was a legislator, he was a leader. And many other mediums throughout history, many of them we know, we call them prophets. Even before, in the old Greece, so many of the spirits will pass communications to people. The oracles will do that. But in spiritism, there is something about mediumship that is really, really important. That is also part of the premises of we adopt here in spiritism. And that is also from Allan Kardec, from the book Heaven and Hell, right here. Spiritism has come to show the exclusively moral, consoling, and religious purpose of relations with those beyond the grave. This has a purpose. Moral. What is moral? Religion, organized religion, talks a lot about moral. But moral is the application of our ethics, our distinction between what is good, what is positive, what is useful, what is helpful. It is that application, the action that has ethical foundations. So mediumship is an inherent human faculty that must be used with the purpose of teaching, helping, consoling, enlightening. Because what comes from the spiritual world can be really, really important for us to follow. And especially those messages and those lessons that come to us showing us the directions that are important for us to take in order to live better, in order to give meaning to a lot of the difficulties that we go through in our lives. And in many ways to alert us, also to change our ways. How many times we feel that we are stuck somewhere in life? That sometimes we just think that if we had one direction that we could take, if we had guidance, and the mediumship under the guide of Spiritism has that purpose. We do mediumship with purpose. We don't do that out of curiosity. We don't do that out of spectacle. We don't do that out of trying to bring people here just because it is interesting. We do that because through that faculty that is well used, we can help ourselves and we can help others. And now we finally come to those two figures that we spoke about, Chico Xavier and André Luiz. Each one of them will have probably an entire symposium about them. So we are here just brushing, upon the surface. Chico Xavier. His name is Francisco Cândido Xavier. He was born in Brazil and lived his whole life in Brazil. He is an individual that we can call medium. Not only that, he is very important because he is one of those individuals that had this faculty, mediumship, in one of the most ostensive states. And he was able to use that ability to communicate with the spiritual world for one of the most morally advanced purposes. The ability that Chico Xavier had to communicate messages of consolation for thousands and thousands and thousands of mothers that lost their children, that left before them to the spiritual world, and came back. Those children, those spirits came back, and Chico Xavier donated his time and good part of his life transmitting those messages, showing that those spirits are alive, that they continue living in the spiritual world, giving messages to tell them, don't cry. Don't feel like we are separated forever. Our hearts hurt today, but the future holds something precious. We will meet again in this world that we call the spiritual world, where finally the doubts are going to disappear. The reasons why things happen in our lives will be revealed. Why the pain? Why the suffering? Why the difficulty? And that is the meaning of that consolation. Many people come to the Spiritist Center exactly because of difficulties, struggles, and pain, trying to make sense of a lot of the experiences that they go through, that if they didn't find that meaning, probably life will be close to unbearable. And many people would feel like giving up. But Spiritism helps so many people through those messages saying to them, don't give up. The reasons are still veiled, but will be revealed. While you wait, work. While you wait, continue serving for the purpose that life put you here. For all of us, we are here together. We live together. Most of you came with somebody else. You live with someone. You take care of someone. You help countless people in your work. You have friends. You have lots of people that you have challenges with as well, that you need to learn how to silence when they speak loudly. Then you need to learn sometimes how to let go when they are not in their best. And sometimes we need to ask for forgiveness to others, and others are learning also how to let go of the things that we did to them. So there is a lot of purpose in this life. Mediumship is the vehicle of the lessons that come from the spiritual world. And then there is one of those spirits that when Chico Xavier was among us, among the living, as we say, he is already discarnated. He left in the year 2000 or 2002. I don't remember exactly now. 2002. Thank you. But while he was with us, he had the presence of countless spirits that through him communicated. And why is André Luiz, this specific spirit, important for us? The first encounter that they had, it was around 1941. Chico Xavier had the ability to perceive the spiritual world almost like no one else. He could communicate with the spirits, he could see the spirits around him, and he had a mentor called Emmanuel. His spiritual mentor one day started being accompanied by a young fellow that looked like a doctor, dressed like a doctor. And for a few years, he was there. Until the day that, Chico Xavier became very curious because that spirit was there. And he asked his mentor, and he asked the spirit, who are you? You're here for a while with me. And many of those spirits that would be surrounding Chico Xavier will give messages, will write, and Chico Xavier will then, through himself, give those messages. But this spirit then, in order to continue anonymous, he asked Chico Xavier, who is this boy that is in the other room? Chico Xavier had a nephew, and the name of the nephew was André Luiz. So then this spirit that appeared to Chico Xavier like a doctor said, okay, you can call me that. So from that moment on, Chico Xavier knows this spirit as André Luiz, because it was the way to just, give me a name. And the name was the name of Chico Xavier's nephew. To keep being anonymous. And why? If we think about our spiritual life, and that is one of the first lessons that André Luiz gives to us through mediumship, we are not Tiago, Raquel, more Tiago. We are today in this incarnation. This is one of our, let's call, spiritual facets. Today, I am Tiago because as Tiago, I have tasks to perform. I have lessons to learn. I have people to relate to. I have growth to do. But when I'm back in the spiritual life, I am more than that. I am not Tiago anymore. I am Tiago, but I am me, my whole self as a spirit. My previous incarnations, I was probably Raquel, I was probably Cecilia, I was probably others. There were facets of me as a spirit. André Luiz, and that is the first lesson, André Luiz is not only the doctor that lived on earth, that lived probably a very privileged life in the end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century in Brazil, being a doctor, having opportunities. And he himself says, and probably I didn't use those opportunities very well. And I am more than that. I was that doctor. Today, I am an apprentice in the spiritual world. And André Luiz, through the mediumship of Chico Xavier, wrote countless books, messages throughout, many, many decades. But I'm just going to talk about one specific collection. Many call the collection André Luiz, and many call the collection Life in the Spiritual World. It is a compilation of 16 books. Those are 13 primary books and 3 extra that are together making what is called Life in the Spiritual World. It is considered the first direct account from one spirit to describe to us an entire journey of his existence in the spiritual world after departing the material world and describing everything that he was living there. He opens up the privacy of his own existence and shares with us through 16 books, years and years and years of a life in the spiritual world. And there is so much in this collection that he teaches us. In the preface of the first book that was published in 1943, that is called Nosso Lar, or Our Home. In English, the translation is the Astral City. It's kind of catchy, probably. The meaning is just like, let's make it catchy. But it is basically our home, life in the spiritual world. And what is our home? What is Nosso Lar? Nosso Lar is the description of a spiritual city. Because suddenly, through André Luiz and other spirits, we start understanding that not only life in the spiritual world exists, but it is much greater than anyone would think of. Many would think that the primary life was this one, and the spiritual life was almost like a copy of the material world. And he tells us, no, we here try in a very difficult way to reproduce a little bit how life is in the other side. So he describes that big city called Nosso Lar, where there are schools, there are hospitals, there are workers, there are different sectors, organizations. There is an entire system to help the spirits that are in the other side, welcoming them from the material life when they discarnate, studying, working, helping each other, and also preparing to come back. Because we are in this movement of incessant incarnation and discarnation, incarnation and discarnation. And why is this a blessing for us? Because that is the way that the spirit evolves. That is the way that us as spirits, we grow. So André Luiz comes and shows that life, helping us to expand our minds, expand our conscience for that, conceiving that existence. And in a very important way, when we do that, we are able to continue connected with it. We reconnect with that essence of the spiritual world. And we can then continue that communion. It is not that we need to believe for this world to exist, but when we are open for it, we can then do things. We can then understand that there is a way for us to arrive there better by living here in a certain way that will help us to continue our lives as spirits in a much better, much fruitful, much happier way. So I will just describe one specific snippet of the preface of the first book of this entire collection that was written by the spirit Emmanuel, who is Chico Xavier, spiritual guide, who actually coordinated all the works of Chico Xavier for us, with the letters, with the books, with the writings, with the messages. It is called A New Friend. André Luiz has come to tell us that the greatest surprise of bodily death is what places us face to face with our own conscience. And it is interesting because just that phrase, if we try to unpack today, even the most advanced science today, which is the quantum physics that talks about the relationship with the subatomic world, they today study a lot the survival of the conscience after material death. And they are doing a lot of studies in this specific area, showing that those dimensions, in fact, are interconnected. And here it is, 1943, in the preface, saying, the bodily death is the place that let us face our own conscience. He reminds us that the earth is our sacred school, that no one could desecrate without knowing the price. Through showing, first of all, how he himself, André Luiz, arrived in the spiritual world is a great lesson for us. André Luiz gives us the introduction to the spiritual life. And in the first book, there is a description of André Luiz arriving in the spiritual life after living the way that he lived, which was a life with possessions, a life with status, a life with social status. Being a doctor in the beginning of 20th century, it was way more than it is today, the status that certain specific professions had, with a family that had means. However, he says, I didn't use that well. And when I arrived in the spiritual world, instead of seeing myself enjoying the happiness and the bliss of spiritual life, I saw myself suffering. And he suffered for a while. And today we understand that suffering means our conscience is then face to face with the consequences of everything that we have done here, and how we use the concessions that were given to us. How were the tools that were given to us being used by us? And when I say tools, I don't say like the hammer that is there in the kitchen that was used here yesterday, but I'm talking about our own bodies, our ability to communicate, our feelings, our intelligence, the opportunities that we had to go to a school, to learn a profession, and to help or to dedicate ourselves to others. There is so much that was given to us in this incarnation. Imagine that all the conditions for billions of years on this earth needed to be such for now, 4.5 billion years after, we are a humanity that is able to grow in intelligence, in consciousness, in awareness of ourselves, in creating societies, developing relationships, and what do we do with them? We know some of us do very well, some of us don't. Some of us use very well those concessions, as we say, because when we leave this body, the only thing that we're going to carry with us, it is the result of all that we did. But those tools will stay. But the consequence of the use of those tools will go with us. That's what André Luiz starts telling us. In a state of extreme vulnerability, showing us the way that we live here matters. The way that we do things here matters to us and matters to others. He will show us the life in colonies and cities, that the people still have roles in the other side that are professions. He had tons of teachers while he was there. For those who are interested, I really recommend, because he describes all the lessons that he receives, all the opportunities that he had to learn a lot about his own profession, to learn a lot about the responsibilities that the people have when they come to Earth. How many people were responsible for helping André Luiz, for him to continue growing as a spirit? And the state of spirits after we depart from here and how we arrive there. Throughout the books, I would just tell you very quickly some of the lessons and some of the teachings that are given to us. For instance, the second book, that is called The Messengers, he shows then more than the first one that the death of the body reveals a continuum of existence of this in the spiritual world. He was able to move from different areas in the spiritual world, performing tasks, being together, like, let's call anybody that went here for a placement in school, or you need to do some shadowing, right? You need to go behind some people to learn from them. People who are in a hospital, for instance, you follow, right? Your mentors, your teachers, you observe what other people are doing when they are working. That's what he was doing there as well. Because when he arrives there, he was like full of pride. So I was a doctor in Brazil, so I can help. They say, you're going to calm yourself down. You're going to understand what really that means. And then he becomes an apprentice again. And through that movement of humbleness, he starts learning a lot of the reality on the spiritual world and how really to help people. And he continues working and evolving. And from then on, he starts showing us how reincarnation works. Do we know how did we come here? How much work existed for us? How many conditions needed to be in place? What about the coordination between those who became your mothers and your fathers? How did they end up meeting? What was their process of reincarnating? The influences until they meet. When they conceived you. And then you come to this earth. How many people were there helping you to come to this world from your mother's womb? All that organization, André Luiz helps us to understand that the work is greater than we imagine. Because if there is a lot happening here, imagining the other side. And why does he teach us that? First of all, not for us to feel that we owe necessarily anything, but for us to recognize the greatness of our existence. Instead of thinking that we owe anything, let's do the best with the conditions that we have today. If so much has worked for us to be here, let's take advantage of that opportunity. Let's use that great chance that we had, and let's pay forward. So many helped us. Let's help others. Let's continue that. Not for anybody to feel guilty that you are not doing enough. It is to encourage us to do the best that we can with the tools that we have. If we have low, high social status, if we have low numbers or high numbers in our bank accounts, what matters is what are we going to do with the tools that were given to us today? What can we do today with who we are? Chances are, for many of us, there is always a little something else that we can do. And maybe it doesn't take even that much effort. It takes sometimes putting in perspective some of the difficulties or the struggles that we go through. And maybe listen to others that are going through something similar. If we were able already, unfortunately, to overcome problems, why not then share this with somebody that right now is in that place where you were before, thinking that this probably will never go away. But one day somebody helped you to understand that maybe in the other side, that is going to be a solution. Somebody told you one day, probably, don't give up. Somebody simply sit down with you and listen to you complain. And then you come to the other side, you barely realize that because life is so complicated. But then one day you are able to breathe. And when you're able to breathe, someone comes and sits with you and says, I am struggling. And probably some of us will say, I just got over a problem. Somebody's sitting down with me now and complaining. André Luiz also helps us to understand every time that we learn how to solve one problem, life will give us two. And then when we learn how to solve two problems, life will come and give us four. I don't remember. Mathematics is not very good for me, but from 4, instead of 8, go to 16. It's 4 times 4, and then 16 times 6. That's how we go. Because when we solve problems, we are helping advancements. We are helping people to overcome issues. We are helping somebody to feel relief. Why not then put in practice that? Every time that we master something, don't we want to put in practice? Life gives us the ability to solve problems, and then it's going to give a few more for us to continue solving, starting by our own, and then for the collective good. And so on, so forth. That is one book called The Workers of Life Eternal. That is beautiful. And that is one of the most beautiful phrases in this entire book that says, no one dies. Improvement continues everywhere. Life renews, purifies, and elevates the multiple frames of its servants, leading them victoriously and beautifully to the supreme union with the divinity. I wish there was an entire lecture just talking about that phrase. No one dies. We don't die because we are much more than our material bodies. We are immortal spirits, created simple and ignorant, tending to perfection. The perfection that is possible for us as creatures of the perfection. We are creatures of God. God being all perfect, all love, all purity, all forgiveness. The model of perfection. We cannot be as perfect as God, otherwise we will also be God. But as creatures of God, having the DNA of God in us, having the laws of God, the laws of nature, the divine laws inscripted in our conscience, as Allan Kardec says in the Spirit's book, we arrive here with the intuition of what is right or wrong, with God's laws imprinted in our conscience. And part of our work is to really make those laws become a reality in our daily lives, in our actions, in our thoughts, in our feelings, in our words, and in our relationships. Life renews and purifies itself, leading all its servants, us, finally, to the supreme union with the divinity. We are immortal spirits, and through our evolution and constant improvement, we are then drawing closer and closer to our own source, which is God. And in the words of Apostle John, God is love. Therefore, André Luis, and other spirits that became then our messengers, became our mentors, became our teachers, come from their place in the spiritual life, surround us in this life to help us to understand that the purpose of our lives is to draw closer to love. Love which is forgiving with intention. Love which is silencing when you can protest. Love which is respecting. Love which is teaching when you have opportunity. Love which is learning when you understand that you're not perfect. Our purpose in life is to love and is to be closer to love. Through mediumship, Jesus himself teaches us that we have the chance to make life better. He, in the book of Matthew, there, in that book that we call Bible, right? Matthew describes that passage when Jesus tells his own disciples, and he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority to over unclean spirits, to cast them out, to heal every disease and every infirmity. This number 12 is very important back then in the Hebrew time. 12 meant totality. Symbolically speaking, Jesus is not speaking with 12 disciples. Jesus is speaking with the totality of us. He's telling us, you can heal. You can make life better. You can heal yourself, and who knows, one day others. You can improve your lives. And he gave this task to many and many and many other spirits that came to help us and to understand that life is greater than this existence, that we need to live this existence looking beyond, looking at the infinite, putting the difficulties that we have in perspective, striving to live better, and to do what we do with love, because that is the spice of life that makes everything that we do more meaningful. So thanking Jesus, who is called the medium of God, and thanking all the mediums who, through their selflessness, allowed themselves to be the vehicle of all those lessons and those messages. Hopefully, we can live with the certainty that as spirits, we have victory, we have beauty ahead of us, no matter how difficult life is today. Our lives have purpose, our lives have meaning. And hopefully, we can take those lessons and put every day in our lives. Through being together, through being here, through being at home, through being in this new space that has been created for us to continue evolving, to continue learning, to continue sharing those experiences with all of you. And hopefully this helps you to become more interested in knowing about yourselves. Because knowing about ourselves will help us to understand our nature, our origin, and our destination towards love. Thank you very much. So I am supposed to be here to answer questions, right? Okay. There are two options, right? Or everybody understood everything, everybody's satisfied, or they don't, or I didn't say anything useful here and they just wanted to get away. Thank you so much for everybody in the internet as well. Can I just say, are we still online, Patrick?
Yeah.
1515A Bayview. That is the new address. Yes. Sure. Yes.
Something that was curious about the lecture, and when you gave the lecture, you mentioned about the 16 books of André Luiz. What was the most incredible one, if you read all 16? Why? And in nosso lar, two questions. And in nosso lar, what was the most incredible thing that you remember the first time you read?
Very good question. Thank you.
That's a test.
Yeah, it's a test. Exactly.
Did you read all
So,
16?
yes, there are three books that I found really that stood out for me. The first one is Nosso Lar because it was the first. I was young when I read. And I was really shocked, to be honest, because it was very impactful reading a book that shows that transition in such a kind of an intense way of a spirit arriving in the spiritual world and not necessarily living in the best of the places. We understand today that the state of André Luiz, that is called for many of us the umbral, actually it is a state of conscience. It is a state of suffering. When in the spiritual life we realize that we didn't take advantage of our existence. That was one of the most shocking things in that moment for me reading. But at the same time, I found incredible that there was one passage that was very interesting. So there was a governor there, like Nosso Lar has a government, just like other cities, right? Like a mayor or anything. So there were many ministries, and there was the governor of Nosso Lar. And one of the conversations that the governor and André Luiz were having, and not with the governor, but one of his teachers, André Luiz had one of his teachers, if I'm not wrong, it was called Lysias, with one of his teachers. And he says, there was a few hundred years ago a movement around here that the governor wanted to cut and kind of help the population to evolve and to cut some of the more material nourishment that they had for mainly water that would come from a specific fountain, that would come from higher plane in the spiritual world, that would give enough nourishment to the spirits. But what was interesting for me was that shock, like, so they eat in the spiritual world, but today we understand that because we go back to the spiritual world, we are still in this process of evolving and growing and dematerializing, let's say. So many spirits would still need some form of more subtle but material nourishment. So for me, it was really interesting that the population in Nosso Lar protested first. But then with the encouragement and everything, after a while, this was implemented. So then they had the water and modified versions of that specific fluid that came from higher planes in the spiritual world. And then you start realizing, wow, Nosso Lar is one, and then suddenly there is more. So it is a slow, gradual process of opening our conscience to understand how vast the spiritual life is. That was one. So there are also, a few books that are very complicated. This one needs like study and dedication, in the domains of mediumship, mechanisms of mediumship. When we go to the ins and outs of that process of mediumship, there is so much knowledge there, from biology, magnetism, right? Like there is so much. It's very heavy. In some way, like, we kind of get stuck there a little bit. But and life goes on. It's a beautiful book. It's the last one. Because it talks about this process of, coming to find your purpose. And a couple that ends up marrying in the spiritual world, but a marriage that is a marriage of two souls that are interconnected with mutual purpose to really put in practice the love that they have. And they prepare all of that before they arrive. So they are preparing their reincarnation as a couple, but they marry already there as a kind of a, rehearsal of what they're going to do in the material life. And it is beautiful as well at the end, showing the justice of reincarnation, why there is justice in reincarnation. because it is a gift of God. So justice never comes without love and without mercy. It counts everything. So it shows that a person killed another. So one would think, in terms of justice, this person is going to be reborn and is going to die in the same way. No, they will become the father of the other person that they killed here. But then you start thinking, why? Because isn't the purpose love? Love was sick back then, so one killed the other. So how can you restore the ability to love? How do I restore? Giving one of the most precious relationships that you can have here. So then they become father and son, for instance. So by that completely inoffensive person, the dedication and the love and the devotion for the one that one day took my life, but the forgiveness of the past gives me the opportunity to renew that feeling, that no matter what happened in the past, my intention is to really restore the love that one day was sick and didn't allow me to really do that good. So there is a lot there. I hope that gives a little bit of a teaser for people to understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for those who watch us online. I hope you guys have a nice weekend. We'll get ready for our passes here.